the wonderful world of Dark Lords. Report 2. Encanto. When the mists cleared around me, I found myself in a place that could hardly be more different from the Pride Lands. Instead of barren rock, I stood at the edge of a lush jungle that opened into fertile farmland. Where the people of the Pride Lands were gaunt and desperate, the people of Encanto were plump-cheeked and laughing. It seemed at first to be a paradise and a safe haven for those who found refuge in its borders. Of course, my thoughts on this village very nearly did not reach your eyes, my dear patron. After reading your commentary on my previous report, I was prepared to return home and find a more fulfilling task. Mucking a stable, perhaps. You appeared willing to send me out prior to giving me any tutelage in magic, all the while blaming me for the sloppy work that this lack of tutelage engendered. I would remind you, Yensid, that you had your pick of seasoned wizards in Darkon. You chose me. After my experiences in Encanto, however, it seems I was not entirely without magical protection. The ring you gave me upon hiring me is more than a mere symbol of support. Am I meant to be grateful to my generous patron for equipping me with the bare minimum of resources needed to do this job? In any case, as you will see, these protections were entirely necessary for me to escape Encanto with my will intact. The village's matriarch is far more competent and beloved than Scar, but I believe that merely makes her more dangerous. Her magic is a more subtle kind, and while her village seems idyllic, there are cracks under the surface.
Welcome to Wonderful World of Dark Lords. I'm Tom.
I'm Rachel.
And we're discussing how to convert Disney movies to Ravenloft Domains of Dread because a podcast about turning Disney movies into D&D adventures wouldn't be niche enough.
Along the way, we'll look at the Dark Lord, the domain itself, and some plot hooks and adaptation ideas to integrate this setting into your own campaign.
Today's episode, Encanto. The village of Encanto, this is a big change of pace from The Lion King. This is almost the opposite of The Lion King. Because we started with The Lion King because it's very easy to convert into a domain of dread. It's a kingdom, it's a domain, and we didn't have to change anything about the backstory. This isn't any kind of AU. It was just literally doing The Lion King, only it's in Ravenloft, and they're Leonin instead of lions. But in Encanto, obviously, we have to make more changes. Now, some of these things we're going to do a full-on the villain wins, or it's a very dramatically different alternative universe. This one, our goal is to preserve a lot of the plot stuff of the movie Encanto, but change some of the backstory. Whereas Encanto, it's a society, but we hear so little about the society. Almost all of the movie is focused on the family, and really the dramatic engine of the whole story is the family conflict and the family tension, the domestic drama with the family Madrigal. So one of our challenges here, and we're going to do our best to fulfill that challenge, is taking that domestic drama and making it a kind of a situation that a group of heavily armed transients could enter that situation and engage with that situation and resolve it in a satisfying way. So it's a very different type of engagement with the domain than in The Lion King, but hopefully you'll have just as much fun in La Casita Madrigal as you did in the Loxodon and Harengon-filled Pride Lands of our previous episode.
This is Future Rachel. In our original recording, I popped in here to do a quick content advisory saying that because we were talking about Encanto, we'd also be touching on some of the same heavy issues that the movie does. Emotional abuse, gaslighting, that kind of thing. Before we recorded, sweet, naive little past Rachel said that it probably wasn't going to get too bad because we're a PG-rated, family-friendly podcast. It got dark, y'all. It got real dark. It turns out that when you take a movie that deftly touches on generational trauma and dysfunctional families in a family-friendly way and turn it into a horror setting, you basically get Hereditary. We'll be talking about emotional abuse and gaslighting. We'll be talking about brainwashing and cults. We'll be talking about the way abused characters try to ingratiate themselves to their abusers. It's bad news. As far as PG-rated and family-friendly goes, we don't say any swear words or talk about the birds and the bees, but we're going to be talking about the ways that Abuela psychologically harms these characters, so if you have a kid who really loves Maribel or Luisa or someone, it might be upsetting for them to hear. It probably will be upsetting for them to hear. We don't start low-key hating ourselves until the Dread Possibilities section, so we'll give you timestamps where to skip ahead when we get to that part if you want to tough it out till then. If you want to entirely skip a version of Encanto where the relationship between Abuela and the Madrigals is more like the relationship between a vampire and their ghouls in Vampire the Masquerade, we completely understand, and we'll see you next month. The link to our free write-up on DM's Guild is in the show notes. Sometimes it's easier to read these things so you can skim them than to listen to them, and that way you don't miss the said metaplot developments. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure that at least one of our listeners felt his eyes turn into giant cartoon hearts when he heard that comparison, so if you also don't like nice things, then let's rejoin past Tom and past Rachel.
Getting into darkening the story, because we have to. It's a story that's dark, but it is a story that's ultimately positive, and that's not Ravenloft, friends.
Yeah, we almost feel bad about doing this.
We sure do.
Yeah, because it's such a beautiful story of redemption and healing, and that's not what Ravenloft's all about, Charlie Brown.
But what if it wasn't?
What if it wasn't?
And that's the wonderful thing we're going to be exploring today.
If you watch the ending, I know a lot of people are very strongly emotionally attached to this movie for fairly obvious reasons. And if you watched this movie and were seething because Alma Madrigal got off too easily, this is the podcast for you, my friends.
She sure doesn't get off too easy here. Speaking of Abuela Alma Madrigal, that is our Dark Lord, fairly obviously. That was the easiest thing to transition, as we do have this really clear central figure that is the sort of sovereign, in so much as there is a sovereign, and is the center of this world in a way that the Dark Lord is.
So that is an excellent segue into our Dark Lord segment. The Lord. The leader of Encanto, Alma Madrigal, eschews titles such as Queen or Lady. Instead, her people call her either Grandmother or Abuela. The tale of the town's founding sounds closer to myth than history, but I could find no alternate telling. According to the people of Encanto, Alma and many other residents of her former village fled mere moments ahead of a Falkovnian press gang. Alma's husband, Pedro, heroically sacrificed himself to buy the villagers time to escape, and as Alma cried out to the gods in her sorrow and despair, the jungle, mountains, and village burst from the ground around her, creating a safe haven that the soldiers could not penetrate. The people of Encanto view Alma with a reverence that borders on worship, and for her part, she genuinely seems devoted to their safety and prosperity. What's more, the enchanted candle that she credits for saving them from the Falkovnians has also given her descendants minor magical gifts, all of which they use for the betterment of the village. Alma herself claims not to have any gifts of her own. I intended for my reports to stay entirely in the realm of proven empirical facts, but as my patron chided me for my lack of wild speculation in my previous endeavor, I will feed his insatiable need for gossip. I suspected from the beginning that Alma Madrigal did receive a magical gift. Otherwise, the fanatical devotion of every single citizen of Encanto is difficult to explain. And, as my patron will soon see, that suspicion was all but confirmed before I left the village behind me.
Our Dark Lord is Abuela Alma Madrigal. And let's start, just in case anyone's listening for the first time, with the idea of a Dark Lord. A Dark Lord is a very central figure in a domain in Ravenloft. A Dark Lord is sort of the foundation that the entire domain is built around. In 5e is your main edition, the Strahd von Zarovich is the Dark Lord of Barovia. It's all built around him. So, Rachel, tell us more. What is a Dark Lord specifically, and why is Abuela Madrigal such a good Dark Lord?
Well, a Dark Lord is an evil being who commits some kind of act of ultimate darkness and draws the attention of the Dark Powers. And then the Dark Powers say, why, hello, new friend, and they trap them forever in a domain which is a hell crafted specially just for them. Every domain is tailored to its Dark Lord to reflect their sins and imprison them there forever. When we talk about Dark Lords, we have 4 elements of a Dark Lord that we're really looking at, and we're going to briefly run through those and how they relate to Strahd von Zarovich. If you listened to our pilot, we really mean briefly this time. We're not going to talk about it for 10 minutes again. This is going to be a brief rundown. So we have our 4 elements. The first is that, once again, they commit an act of ultimate darkness. Strahd killed his brother in order to try and get with his fiancée. The second element is one that we call, in honor of Dr. Facilier, you got what you wanted but lost what you had. They get what looks like everything they wanted on paper, but it's in kind of an evil genie monkey's paw version of it. In Strahd's case, his brother's out of the picture. He has unquestioned and absolute power. He has eternal youth, which is one of the things that he thought was holding him back from taking on it. He's a vampire now. He's young forever. But he doesn't have T'Challa. The one thing that made him do all of this stuff is out of his grasp forever. The third element of a good Dark Lord is that they've got an element of tragedy or relatability to them. In Strahd's case, he's a horrible person, but it's really awful when you're into someone and they're not into you. That's a really terrible feeling. And then the fourth element is that the domain reflects the Dark Lord and their sins and their curse in some way. So in Strahd's case, he did all this, he became a vampire, and Barovia is the ultimate vampire land. It's dark, it's spooky, it's gothic, it's full of all kinds of wolves and bats and haunted castles and frightened peasantry who are afraid of all of his vampiric powers but also can never be an equal to him. To quote Voltaire, it's so lonely when you're evil. So, Tom, that's kind of our rundown for Strahd's elements. Let's talk a bit about how those apply to Abuela.
Well, first is our act of ultimate darkness. This is the biggest change we're making, the biggest thing that does not apply to Encanto, the movie itself. This is where we're starting to change the lore to make this a darker and more of a horror setting. So put a pin in that for now. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, the other three fit so perfectly. We'll talk about those first and then
just
loop back
right out of the gate, no modification needed. So then we have got what you wanted, lost what you had, the torment. And this is really where we saw Encanto and started thinking about Abuela as a Dark Lord. Because you have that just beautiful, in a really mean way, set up with this character that she is putting this enormous amount of pressure on her family, nominally for the sake of her family. Everything she's doing to preserve the family's image. She's doing to preserve their role in society. She's doing to preserve their sort of reputation. And all the stuff she's doing for her family is destroying her family. It's driving the grandchildren apart. She's lost her son Bruno. There's this great family secret that kind of is this great shame that she's destroying her family in the name of her family, and that is a beautiful Dark Lord curse right there. Then we have the element of tragedy and relatability. And part of the reason that this movie is, I think, so popular and so successful and why it hits home so well is because this is a kind of social familial dynamic. If you haven't lived it, you recognize it and you see and you understand it. That obsession with appearance, that obsession with the surface, that obsession with we need to make the world think we're a happy family and we're a perfect family and that everything's great and everything's wonderful and we're just going to ignore all of the problems and just push them down and present this kind of very nice facade of harmony and of love and of competence to the world. Forget about everything else.
And I think with it being so popular, most people who are relating to a member of the family Madrigal is going to be relating to one of the kids or grandkids. I have not heard a single person cop saying that they identify with Abuela, because I'm sure that there are people who do, but that's not the kind of thing that you admit in public. But there is that element of relatability there that hopefully most of us don't take it to the extent that Abuela does, but there's that sense of we know that there's somebody who's unhappy, but at the same time everything seems to be humming along just fine, and if we dig up those problems, maybe they won't be humming along just fine anymore, so we'll get to those problems later. We'll address them, when the right time comes.
And the final element is the domain reflecting the personality and the curse. That core element of the Gothic starts with Strahd and Castle Ravenloft adventure, that becomes the template for the whole domain of dread, that the domain is an externalization of the Dark Lord's inner reality. Barovia is sort of an externalization of Strahd's inner reality. And there's another thing Encanto is so perfect. This is, like Lion King we mentioned, one of the reasons the Disney movies do work so well for domains is they do have that strong sense of metaphor, that strong sense of symbolism. There is that clear externalization of the internal. When Scar is ruling over the Pride Lands, it is a dead and barren wasteland. I think we almost don't need to say it, but the cracks that the house represents the family, represents the village, represents Abuela and her relationship with all of them, and it's all crumbling, it's all falling apart because of the pressures in the family. That the cracks in the house, in the casita, are caused because of the cracks in the family. And they are repaired at the end. They are healed because the family is healed.
Mm-hmm.
But what if it wasn't?
What if it wasn't? And then you've even got the first time the cracks appear at Antonio's gift ceremony, that Mirabel's the only one who sees them. So you've got the idea of these cracks that everyone else sees this beautiful, perfect image, but some of the people within the family can see where the cracks are starting to appear on the fault lines.
And we even have the scene where Abuela is sort of praying and talking to the spirit of her husband and talking to the candle. And we, with Maribel, find out Abuela knows the cracks are there.
Mm-hmm.
But she told everyone they weren't, because once again, that obsession with facade, that desire to present a brave, strong, perfect face to the world is causing her to force everyone to turn away from the actual problems that are tearing her family and her home apart.
Mm-hmm.
Dark Lord.
Dark Lord.
So without further ado, to your great anticipation, going back to our first characteristic of the Dark Lord, the act of ultimate darkness. And this is a lot longer than the one for Scar, because Scar's like that part of the movie where he does does the worst thing he does in the movie. We have to talk about this entire new backstory we invented for Abuela, for the village, for the family.
It's an AU!
Woo, that's what the internet's for.
So originally when we were talking about Abuela as a Dark Lord, it seemed like the obvious place to have her commit her act of ultimate darkness would be something around Maribel's gift ceremony, specifically possibly murdering Bruno, and now he's a ghost.
And we were like, wow, we made this a lot darker. Buckle up, listener. We're just getting started.
So then we rewatched the movie, and there's that moment where the village gets formed, right after Abuelo Pedro sacrifices himself, and Abuela is sobbing, and the candle lights, and then the light spreads out from the candle, and the trees and the mountains in the village all start sprouting out of the ground, and that right there is a domain getting found.
Yeah, we were like, we kind of have to make that related to the act of ultimate darkness.
Yeah, this little patch of land has been created in Abuela's image. That's gotta be the moment when the domain is founded.
If we're making this a Ravenloft setting.
Yes. So that means that whatever thing she did has to be connected to that moment. So it seemed like the obvious thing would be to have her be connected to her husband's death in some way. We could have had it be that she was in some way collaborating with the soldiers, but that's dumb. That doesn't really work. So it seemed like something that fit Abuela's personality better, and kind of her idea of sacrificing her family's happiness for the greater good or whatnot might be if it wasn't entirely Pedro's idea to stall the soldiers. Maybe Abuela tripped him so that he was there and the soldiers caught up with him. Maybe she shoved him out there and kept running. She did something that caused the soldiers to focus on Pedro so everyone else could get away. And Pedro, if she had asked him to, he would have sacrificed himself. But she didn't ask. She made that choice.
So that counts as murder.
That counts as murder, yes.
And this fits in very well with the theme we're trying to establish with what we see in the movie, where Pedro urges them all to go forward, kisses her goodbye, turns around, confronts the soldiers. That's the story Abuela told everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so that already is setting up this theme that we want to do of this idea of sort of the surface and the narrative and the legend of the family Madrigal being something that he is the caretaker of that persona, of that legend, and she prioritizes that over the actual family itself.
Yeah. Incidentally, in the narration, we specifically mentioned it being a Falkovnian press gang. We just did that because no matter what edition you're running, there are Falkovnian press gangs. So it's something that's easily applicable. Obviously, in all cases, it's your game, do what you want. But in this case especially, we just went with that because it was something that could apply to any edition you were playing.
So that is our act of ultimate darkness. And as I said, that is just the beginning of us darkening this story. So we'll talk more about the sinister secret of Abuela, the shadow over the paradise of the village of Encanto, when we get a little more into talking about Abuela as a Dark Lord.
Really sorry for ruining this beautiful movie about love and redemption for anyone. But not too sorry, because we're still doing it.
I mean, you're listening to our podcast.
Yes. So, speaking of talking about Abuela as a Dark Lord, with all of the Dark Lords, they've got their powers and dominion. So, we need to look at Abuela and what she does in the movie and what those powers would be. As we talked about with Scar, with some Disney villains, this is going to be more obvious than with others. Ursula turns into a kaiju. But with others, we have to look at some of the things that they do within the movie and extrapolate from there.
Dungeons and Dragons them up a little bit.
So one obvious power that actually is in the movie is her control over La Casita. That she's got this terrain control, that the house is animate, it does what the family wants it to do. Tom has done some research into stuff about the movie, and it's apparently very common fanon that in the movie it's the ghost of Pedro.
Right, yes. And since we are making the sort of animating force, the miracle, this is really dark, guys. We are making the miracle of Encanto actually the dark powers. Mm-hmm. It's very easy, and once again, this is something we're going to revisit, it's very easy to make the sort of animating power of the casita, which is connected with the candle, which is connected with the miracle, actually sinister. Actually the dark powers of Ravenloft indulging and encouraging Abuela's worst impulses.
There was a thing that they did in the older material for familiars. That was the idea that if you summoned a familiar within Ravenloft, if you came from outside and brought a familiar with you, it was fine. But if you summoned a familiar within Ravenloft, then the dark powers would be the one who sent it to you. The familiar would be the personification of the wizard's id. It would be kind of encouraging the wizard's worst impulses. Depending on your GM would be how conscious it was of this, whether it was like actually reading the wizard's mind and tapping into those impulses.
Or if it was just that there was this animal and had a psychic connection to its master.
And subconsciously was picking up on.
Right, the psychic connection was plugged into the darkest part of the master's psyche and will and emotions.
So you could very easily have La Casita work in the same way, that it's plugged into Abuela's darkest impulses. It's gonna do what she wants it to do. If she says how to set the table, it's gonna set the table, but it's also going to be doing things like subtly kind of bumping Mirabelle as she's walking to make her look bad.
So that's the obvious supernatural sort of power, quote unquote, I'm air quoting, you can't see, power that she displays is that control of La Casita. And in Dungeons and Dragons terms, that's going to be a fantastic boss fight. If you want to do a boss fight. Look at some spells about terrain control, look at some spells about animated objects like animated brooms. It would not be too hard to put together a very unique, cool, memorable fight where you're fighting a house. The other set of powers she has are less supernatural but more social, and that is her social power over the family, her social power over the community. And we figured the best way to communicate that power is stuff with the charm spell or the charm ability.
We mentioned in the Lion King episode that Scar can get people to do what he wants, but no one really likes him. So he has suggestion, but he doesn't charm people. Abuela, everyone loves her. She's the pillar of the community. Everyone absolutely adores her. It really works for her to have cast charm on everyone in the village.
So you can mechanically represent this as giving her the power to cast charm at will. You can give her the ability to cast spell mass suggestion. So we do have those scenes where she's addressing the family and she's addressing the crowd, the community, the whole town is there. And she says, no, the magic is strong. Like nothing is wrong. We are the family Madrigal. And the first time or two she does that, you see the people are convinced. They respect her so much that they're going to take her word that everything's fine, and you can reflect that with the mass suggestion spell.
You could also, with the charm, rather than having it be that she casts it at will, you could have it be something with every day that you spend in Encanto, you have to make a will save to avoid being charmed. So the longer you stay there, the more likely it is you're eventually going to fail.
It could just be like this ambient effect that you stay in Encanto, you start to see Abuela Madrigal as your Abuela, basically.
Oh, I didn't think of it that way. That's gross.
I mean, not like literally, but
no,
like...
but no,
yeah,
but you got, yeah, she suddenly, no matter what you thought of her when you first came in, she's the grandmother you never had. That's, oh, gosh. Ugh.
Told you getting dark, folks. You thought the Lion King was dark with the roving gangs of Knoll cannibals. We are like way past that.
And then with that charm ability, we really see her using it to great effect on her family, because that's the kind of person she is.
And that's how families work.
And so we figured that if she tries to use her charm powers on family members, then they have disadvantage on their wisdom saves.
And yeah, it's just a very simple taking these pre-existing spells and rules and having them reflect that family dynamic, that family power. But then you could even have, as the situation in the movie's escalating, the wisdom save is dropping. Just as even with the crowd, by like the third or fourth time, you can see the skepticism in the faces of the crowd when she's insisting that everything's fine, the magic is strong, the family is strong, because as the circumstances change, the wisdom save for defeating that mass suggestion or that charm is dropping. So by the end of the movie, even with disadvantage, it's like 10.
Yeah. And then the last power that she has is the power that every Dark Lord has, is just closing the borders. And that, once again, we see that when the domain is founded in the movie. The mountains grow up, the jungle becomes impassable. Just suddenly, no matter where you go, you're just trapped in this impenetrable mountain jungle realm. And every path you take somehow just leads you back to the village.
It's even part of the point of the village in the movie is it's a bubble. Mm-hmm. That it is a self-contained bubble that is cut off from the outside world, or if you like to call it in our podcast, a domain.
Speaking of domains, let's talk a little bit about the village of Encanto and its unique domain qualities in the land. The land. The people of Encanto, almost without exception, are refugees and their descendants from seemingly every domain of Ravenloft and beyond. The village is incredibly diverse, its people united only by a history of persecution. Curiously, this diversity does not spread to their customs, language, or dress, with everyone from Heslani to Gundarakites to Vistani adopting the practices of Alma's original village. The Vistani were the most troubling of the lot. Their smiles were as friendly as those of all the other villagers, but their eyes were empty, and I wondered what could have forced them to adopt this sedentary lifestyle. Before you chastise me, my patron, I eventually found out. The moment the villagers saw me, they assumed that I was fleeing from trouble as well. They welcomed me warmly, offering me food and shelter without reservation. Upon hearing that I was a scholar, they immediately made plans for me to begin teaching at the local school. With Abuela's permission, of course, as soon as they could arrange for her to formally welcome me. It was frankly unnerving to see how quickly they mapped out the entire course of my life. When I questioned them about the history of Encanto, they supplied me with its foundational myth, or foundational fact, before telling me what few troubles they had had in the past were well behind them. Alma's son, Bruno, had been a seer of some power. He had foreseen many accidents and misfortunes that had befallen the villagers, but too late to stop them, and the villagers suspected that he was cursing them somehow. These misfortunes have not abated since his disappearance 10 years ago, suggesting two possibilities. Either he truly did foresee calamities rather than causing them, or he is still somewhere in Encanto, alive or dead.
As a domain, the village of Encanto is a self-sufficient, isolated farming village. It is a seeming paradise in the murderous, dark, monster-filled wasteland of Ravenloft. It is just this beautiful, tropical village. It's peaceful, it's full of love, it's full of warmth, that this group of refugees, who in our version are these refugees from a Falkovnian press gang, they were escaping and they found this little magical pocket where everything is provided for. They have all the natural resources they needed to recreate their own life. With the supernatural gifts of the Madrigals, they're able to have abundant crops, abundant healing. They have everything they need. It really is the best possible place you could live in Ravenloft. And everyone is generally closed off. The borders are closed the vast majority of the time. But in our imagining, every couple of years, a group of refugees will find their way there. The borders will somehow know that a group of refugees is trying to escape persecution or suffering or oppression, and the mists will lead them to the village of Encanto, and they will be welcomed, they will be fed, they will be healed, and they will find a new home, all under the benevolent leadership of the matriarch, Alma Madrigal.
Isn't that a beautiful story? So the way that we're seeing this is that the refugees arrive, and it's an incredibly diverse village. You've got, it's as our narrator mentioned, you've got people from just all walks of life and from every possible domain and beyond. There are people who've come in there from, straight to Encanto from other planes. But while it has incredible ethnic diversity, there's not the same level of cultural diversity, because as they stay there, suddenly everyone finds that they're just overjoyed to adopt Abuela's customs. It is absolutely delightful to take on the customs that Abuela has brought and to live as a citizen of Encanto and to leave behind their old ways and their old gods and their old cuisines and clothing and whatnot, and just adapt to the proper way for things to be.
Thus you have harmony.
Exactly. If you're running the older editions where Ravenloft is very human dominant, or if that's your version of 5e for that matter, then it's quite possible that there are going to be a lot of non-humans in Encanto. This would be a real haven for non-humans. And once again, that would be a thing where it looks absolutely idyllic and like this wonderful cosmopolitan melting pot, except that suddenly you've got elves and dwarves who are acting exactly like humans, because that is how Abuela wants them to act. One especially creepy possibility here for the people who are arriving and leaving their former customs behind is with the Vistani, especially if you are going off of the older material, but again, it's something that you can very easily adapt the basic creepiness of it to 5e also. Because in the older editions of Ravenloft, the Vistani were required to be nomadic. If they stayed in one place too long, then they started suffering from something that was called static burn. They would get sick, and then they would eventually lose, over the course of a couple weeks, they would lose their Vistani powers and become Giorgios. And as far as all the other Vistani were concerned, they were dead. The name for these kinds of Vistani is Mortu. They're not Vistani anymore. They cannot take part in any Vistani customs, any Vistani rituals. If you come to Encanto and you stay there, then you're staying in one place. So it's a particularly horrifying idea that maybe there could be a group of Vistani who are fleeing from persecution. Again, if you're doing the older editions, Invidia has a bunch of anti-Vistani pogroms. Maybe there was a group of Vistani fleeing from Invidia, came to Encanto, thought that they had found a place that they could rest for just a week to kind of get their bearings and then travel out again. But then they realized that, no, why would they want to leave? Encanto
Everything you need is right here.
It's a beautiful place, and Abuela is their new leader, and what more could they ask for? And so...
Ooh, what's the Vistani, matriarch thing?
The Rani.
So yeah, that Abuela's their Rani.
So yes, Abuela's their new Rani, and what more do they need? And so this only needs to happen once or twice for rumor to get out among the other Vistani, and Encanto becomes the place that the Vistani do not go. This is the most cursed place in all of Ravenloft in Vistani Legends. They will go to Invidia and face those death squads before they will go to Encanto. Because Invidia, all they'll do is kill your body. Abuela will kill your soul.
And that could be a really cool if you want to introduce Encanto, and we'll get into a list a little more later, but it's relevant right now, that Vistani that they know say, this is the worst place in the entire domain. This is the place we do not go. This is the cursed, hellish wasteland. And they get there, and it's Encanto. Mm-hmm. And they're all singing and dancing about the family Madrigal. That could be a very fun, shock and episode ender. You think you're going to a horrible hellscape, and you end up in paradise. But what lies beneath paradise? And that is probably a good transition to talk about further changes we've made to the backstory, further sinistering it up that we have done for Encanto. We mentioned that in our version, Abuela murdered her husband and has this kind of supernatural control. But we need more than that. If we want to have, that's pretty sinister, but we need something deeper and more sinister.
And there needs to be something ongoing that's evil. There's no domain where the Dark Lord did this one thing a while ago, but now everything's cool. The Dark Powers really want to keep encouraging the worst impulses of the Dark Lords. And so we need something like that in Encanto to make sure that Alma is continuing to be her very worst self.
So we were talking about Encanto as a horror setting. And we said we were both, this is a spoiler for the future.
Spoilers for the genres of horror section. But
we were both focusing on the idea of folk horror, and that this is, Baby's first Wicker Man. This is a folk horror setting. It is a seeming, especially the way we're imagining it, it is a seemingly ideal village. with a dark secret.
Plus, we both really love folk horror, and there's not a lot of folk horror in Disney, so this might be our one shot.
This is a good example of how you can use the genres of horror from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. We figured out we wanted to do folk horror, and then that really guided us in a lot of the other decisions we made about adapting the setting. So folk horror orbits the star of the Wicker Man. It always comes back to some kind of sinister, usually human sacrifice rituals. So originally we were thinking that the power, the magic, the miracle is fueled by human sacrifice. And that fits in with thematic stuff because she's sort of metaphorically sacrificing her family to try and maintain this power and this miracle and this position in society. And we just take that and make it literal. And so we were rewatching the movie. We were looking at, is there a part where it could be like, and then Abuela goes off with the guy and then doesn't come back? Like the guy, and there's nothing.
Maybe some murder.
Yeah, there's like a little space where some murder could have been happening. And, there isn't, obviously. But watching, we don't talk about Bruno. You do have this whole, he keeps seeing bad things and then getting blamed for the bad things happening. So we were thinking there's something there. Like, if there's going to be murders in Encanto, it's going to be related to Bruno.
And they're going to be terrible accidents because that's all the things that are happening with Bruno are these twists of fate, these bad things that just so happen to befall people.
So what we ultimately came up with is that the refugee community arrives in Encanto, and things are going well, but it's a lot harder than it's going to be. There's no children with magical gifts yet, no one with magical healing food, no one who can control the weather. They have all the struggles of a regular farming community trying to establish a new life. And that also leads to more opposition from Abuela, because once again, she doesn't have that sort of, she is the head of this family whose magic maintains the peace and prosperity and stability. So as Julieta, they're triplets, but we're dividing them a little bit just for the sake of this plot. As Julieta is the oldest and she's coming of age, they're planning to have a big party for the 5th birthday, which is also the 5th anniversary of when they arrived. And Abuela's hoping to make this kind of a, make everybody happy, celebrate, remind them of the wonderful place they found, kind of reinforce her leadership in the community a little bit. And there's a family that's pushing against her a lot. They are really starting to grumble against her leadership, suggest maybe a change of leadership is in order. Yes, you led us here, but things are really hard now. Why should we listen to you? And as this is happening, these years have been going by, the candle is actually starting to burn down. And Abuela is starting to feel herself grow weaker and like more tired and older. And as the party's coming up, Abuela is talking to the candle, and she wishes that this family was dead, that something would happen to them.
Just the way you do. Not like casting a magic spell or anything, but just the way you do when you're really mad at somebody.
And then heard that when she made that very moment she made that wish, their house collapsed and the family died. And then when she heard this message, she looked and the candle had regrown its full length, and suddenly she felt stronger, she felt younger, and then that night the door appeared for Julieta's gift. And so in our imagining, every year on the anniversary of when they came to in the village of Encanto, around that time, Abuela picks someone, says their name to the candle, and they have a horrible accident.
And then around the time of the gift ceremonies, she picks a larger group of people, maybe a family, and some kind of accident befalls them. Their house collapses, burns down, they go out in the jungle to explore and drown in the river tragically.
And so this, as we said, really does fit that general character theme of the ignored truth, this darkness that's at the heart of this family that the people are choosing not to see. And originally we even just had it be a death every gift ceremony. But then Rachel was like, that's not nearly enough death.
Yeah, not for a Dark Lord. Because once again, then it's like, well, why would you live anywhere else? Maybe every 5 years there's gonna be an accident. Just, that's not Ravenloft, sorry.
And part of what we wanted to touch on, and this relates to those themes, is many of the people in Encanto have put 2 and 2 together. Have noticed that nobody ever dies by accident except right around the same time every year. And then there's always a family that dies right before every gift ceremony.
Yeah, they didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday, but they want to have just fallen off the turnip truck yesterday. They don't want to see this. As long as it's not them, as long as it's not their family, then it's worth it to them. Every year they're kind of tensing up as the day approaches, wondering if it's going to be them. And then when it's not, they breathe a sigh of relief and go on with their lives. It's the lottery.
That week beforehand, everyone's laughing a little too nervously, and there's a little glassy terror in the smiles, and then somebody dies, and everybody lets out their breath.
And they can't blame Abuela for this, of course, because she's their beloved leader. Even if there weren't the charm ability, that's just the way communities work. You've got your community that's led by its beloved leader who doesn't take the blame for these things. So they need a scapegoat, they need a pressure valve for this, and so of course it's Bruno. Because Bruno foresees these things happening, it's only a small step to saying that he causes them to happen, which is exactly what went on in the movie, right? He wasn't responsible for any of that. He didn't, kill the lady's fish. But because he was the bringer of bad news, they blamed him for everything.
And then in our version, this status quo is maintained, and you have the magical gifts. Julieta's food suddenly meant that injury and illness is no longer a concern. And the very next year, Peppa gets her weather control, and suddenly that really helps if you're a farming community. So suddenly those problems go away. And also, every time this happens, the candle grows, the candle doesn't burn down, and Abuela feels that youth and that strength. And we added that specifically because it is important that there be a selfish reason. Abuela would say it is for the good of the village. It is for the good of the community. But it's not. It's also for her good. It makes her younger, it makes her stronger, and it ensures that she can have another couple of years of full strength being the leader of this community. And once again, she would always say, because that's what they need. Because I can't ever stop, because then the community will fall apart without my benevolent and wise leadership. And finally, in our version, the status quo changes 10 years before the present, air quotes again. 10 years before the start of the movie, 10 years before around when your adventurers are going to be entering the domain of Encanto.
Which is right around Mirabel's ceremony, because that, just as in the movie, that's when things got really weird. So Bruno has been foreseeing all of this. Enough is enough. He confronts Abuela. He's had a vision of all these things that have happened. Maybe he even has a vision specifically pointing him toward Abuela, saying, okay, Gag, you're not just foreseeing these deaths. You're foreseeing that Abuela is the one causing them, and you can't ignore it anymore. So he confronts her in his tower. They fight. Abuela kills him. Depending on the age of your players, that'll determine exactly how accidental it is. He's got the big tower. He has the vision. It's a physical object. They can be fighting over it. She can deliberately push him. She can be wrestling it out of his hands, and then he falls. Whatever the case may be, Abuela kills her own son in order to maintain the status quo. We're just taking the subtext and making it text. She was genuinely upset by this. Either that she had this accident, or that she had to make this great and terrible sacrifice for the good of the community. So she figured, well, this has to count as a sacrifice. Please don't tell me that I have to whisper a whole family's name into the candle again. So she hid his body in the walls, where his ghost still comes out and haunts everyone, possibly possessing rats in order to do it.
Possibly 9 feet tall.
Possibly 9 feet tall. When he calls her name, it all fades to black. So she assumed this would be enough, but it wasn't. Mirabel had her ceremony, the door disappeared, the candle started burning lower, the cracks started appearing. Abuela started feeling older. There have actually been more deaths since that ceremony, because she has been frantically whispering names to the candle, trying to get it to burn brighter and higher. But it's not going to until Antonio's ceremony. That's where all the cracks are coming from. That's where everyone losing their powers is coming from, is that the magic is starting to peter out because she didn't make the proper sacrifice.
And this is something they were taking from the movie, where the pressure point, the cracks in the family, kind of all date back to Mirabel's gift ceremony and the falling out with Bruno. And that kind of nothing's been really okay since then. Everyone's been pretending it's okay, but it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And in this case, Abuela knows exactly why Mirabel didn't get a gift. But of course she can't tell. So she's willing to just let there be this sense of, oh, there must be something wrong with Mirabel.
Oh my gosh, poor Mirabel.
That it must somehow be her fault. And that is the sort of emotional, spiritual equivalent of what she did with Bruno. Literally, this is sacrificing this member of her family for the facade of the Madrigal family's role in the community, the place in the community.
And they're still kind of blaming the memory of Bruno for everything that's happening. Like in the movie, they still kind of talk about Bruno as being sort of the black sheep. But we can see it starting to happen in the movie, and it's going to be starting to happen here. Mirabelle's eventually going to be filling that role and being that scapegoat. She's bad luck. She didn't get a gift.
That even fits our story with suddenly there have been more deaths since Mirabelle's veiled gift ceremony. Clearly, like, something's wrong with. She messed things up somehow.
Gosh, poor Mirabelle.
And
her life wasn't bad enough in the movie. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, let's really make her have a miserable life.
I feel guilty just talking about
I
this,
feel
guys.
terrible. And you do have that strong association with Mirabelle and Bruno, and the whole, like, the family weirdos have to stick together. That now Mirabelle is sort of filling that role of being the outsider, being the black sheep, being the one that everyone kind of, like, either dumps on or just sort of treats with pity and thinks of as incompetent and says, the best way you can help is just to stay out of the way.
I need to go and watch the end of Encanto again and I need to go lift my spirits and listen to all of
we told you it was getting dark. Roving Knoll Cannibal Gangs was just the beginning.
Roving Knoll Cannibal Gangs are looking real good right now.
Yeah, right. So in our version, it's kind of playing out like the movie, that Antonio has his gift ceremony because Abuela's killed like 3 families this month. And
she's just getting started.
Just getting started. She'll kill as many people as it takes to save this village.
She has to burn the village to save it.
Yeah, right. She's killed like 3 families this month to make sure Antonio's gift ceremony goes well. The candle's burning brightly. He gets his gift. Everybody breathes a sigh of relief except Mirabelle. But then she turns around, and in the movie, we then immediately get this pressuring Isabella to marry. And in the movie, there's sort of this idea of the Guzmans are this prestigious family. It'll be good for the family. She has a line that's like the Guzmans and the Madrigals together. It's not really clear why, what even is a prosperous family, an important family in this community.
I know there's fan theory that Isabella is gay, so it might be like a way of kind of ironing that out and trying to present this perfect face to the world, but none of this is made explicit at any point.
There is a bit that we're kind of taking off of to explain this, which is, Abuela says something like, oh, you're going to get married, and then we're going to bring another generation of Madrigals in to help the community. So in our version, it's not so much that she really wants one of her grandchildren to marry the Guzmans, as it is, all right, Antonio had his gift ceremony, there's no backup Madrigals anymore. They need to have some babies. I need some great-grandbabies so that we've got this bank of future gift ceremonies to preserve the magic of the candle, and I mean just the candle. So Isabella's the oldest, and Mariano has expressed interest in her, so she's pressuring them to get married as fast as possible. She's pressuring them to have children as fast as possible. And it's not even necessarily anything about Mariano or the Guzman family as much as he's like first up at bat. So the space between Antonio's gift ceremony and this pressure for Isabella to get married, that's kind of where the movie happens, and that's where we're imagining the adventure happening. Which also gives you a wonderful ticking clock of that could be a big plot event that you're building up to, that there's all that extra pressure that, we see that in the movie. There's all that extra pressure on the family to be perfect in this big social facing function. Weddings do tend to bring out the worst in people sometimes. And so that could also be a wonderful event to incorporate into your Encanto adventure to be the thing that's putting the extra pressure on the family and the thing that's sort of the event you're trying to stop as your adventurers investigate and learn the dark secret of Encanto. This is the part of the episode where we talk about the noteworthy features of the domain, and this also is an excellent place to bring in the sort of hardest part of adapting it, the kind of the greatest weakness of Encanto as a domain, which is in The Lion King, we can talk about a whole bunch of locations, we can talk about a whole bunch of interesting NPCs and their relationships to the community and the rest of the Pride Lands. Encanto's got the Madrigals.
and the house.
And the house that the Madrigals live in. Anything beyond that has required a lot of research and a lot of speculation. Like, the only character that is given 2 names that's not a Madrigal is Mariano Guzman. We have like 4 other people, 5 other people, 6 other people that give first names. If you look at the credits and the IMDb page and the junior novelization.
Tom did a deep
which
dive
I did,
into
yes.
Encanto lore.
And then we also have Senora Guzman is Mariano's mother or grandmother who is working on this marriage arrangement with Abuela. So we're going to have to do a lot of fan fiction, Star Wars prequel, Star Wars Expanded Universe type stuff here. We are going to have to take very tiny details and singular examples and build a civilization out of them.
Much like how the Mon Calamari all get a bonus to trap finding. Because Admiral Akbar's most memorable line is, "It's a trap."
So in that spirit, this is what I came up with as a general social system for the village of Encanto. It is a matriarchal society. That's what we see. The main authority figure we see is Abuela. Also, you have that both of the men that marry her daughters, that marry Julieta and Pepa, take the Madrigal last name. Mm-hmm. So as this kind of matriarchal matrilineal society. The only other kind of authority figure we see is Senora Guzman, who's sort of negotiating the marriage with Abuela, which she's sort of there as the representative of the Guzman family, who we're told is important. So I think it's very easy to extrapolate, a valid extrapolation, all Rhodians are bounty hunters extrapolation to say that this is a matrilineal society and this is a matriarchal society.
If you wanted to, you could also say it's matrilineal, or because of the Madrigal surname taking prominence, or it could just be Madrigal lineal. That's if you marry the Madrigals, you're a Madrigal no matter what.
Madrigalineal society.
Madrigalineal society. But that it's, rather than being matriarchal, if you wanted to include someone, you could have it be that it's always the eldest member of the family.
Right.
So maybe Mariano Guzman's mother or grandmother, whatever, is the oldest Guzman, and therefore she can negotiate with Abuela.
And the main kind of social action we see is that marriage negotiation. So we see that scene of those two women negotiating this marriage contract. So it's also, I think, valid with that, and also keeping with the general very small village feel, to say that it is a consensus-based society. Mm-hmm. There is not like a mayor of Encanto. There's not a city council. We can see that family is very important. Even just that line, the Madrigals and the Guzmans, what family you're a part of is a very important part of your identity.
We should say there's not officially a mayor of Encanto. Yeah. There is unofficially a despot of Encanto.
Yeah, a god queen. So our imagining is that in Encanto, any kind of dispute over like boundaries of fields or conflicts between families is negotiated by the heads of those families, whether it's matriarchal, whether it's a mix of the matriarchs and the patriarchs, coming together, having coffee, having pastries, and just having a nice talk where everything gets worked out to everyone's satisfaction.
Governance by coffee klatch.
Exactly, yeah. And Abuela, of course, is if the individual families can't work that out, then of course they are going to bring in the wisdom and judgment and respected authority figure of Abuela Madrigal, who has, as we've established, mind control charm powers.
It gives you a little bit of an edge in
right. My coffee klatch, if you can mind control the other people in the coffee klatch. But we do have, in terms of NPCs, we have the Madrigal family. There are many Madrigals. They have cool powers. They're all cool characters. They're really distinctive. And if your PCs are coming into Encanto, that's the thing they're going to want. They're going to want Madrigals. And this is where I think that large family and that large established personalities and powers is a real benefit. Mm-hmm. This is a thing we're going to talk about a little later. There's really one story to do here. And that story is to do Encanto. Mm-hmm. But everything's terrible and horrible and depressing. To do a story where rather than save the family, you convince Mirabel or a Mirabel equivalent, or possibly, if you're very lucky, and your players will be very happy with this, more than one Mirabel equivalent to leave.
In the movie, kind of the toxic family metaphor was healing the toxic family, kind of getting to the root of it, helping there be peace and harmony and love. This is kind of more doing the metaphor of it's too toxic, it's too horrible, you gotta get out of there and save yourself.
So that's going to be your big variability. It's like in Curse of Strahd, going all the way back to the original Castle Ravenloft, you had the Taroka reading, and you had a level of randomization. Even playing the same adventure, you would have magic items would be in different places, or Strahd's plan would be different, or the battle would be in a different place. Similarly, the kind of big card shuffle here that adds variability is which of the Madrigal children is the one that you kind of win over and turn against the family and get to leave, or maybe more than one. And also, this being Dungeons & Dragons, where all of our problems are solved by punching and fireballs, which of them are the boss fight? In the Dread Possibilities section, we will go through each of those Madrigal grandchildren, and we will talk about them as an ally, as someone who you win over to your side, and also them as a potential enemy in like a big climactic boss fight where you're trying to get out of the toxic Casita Madrigal.
And of course, you can do all kinds of fun combinations as you're trying to get some of them out while others of them are trying to stop you.
In terms of locations, as we said, the only one we get a lot of is the Casa Madrigal, but it's so cool. It is so a TARDIS house. Everyone has their giant theme room. Any of those rooms could be a super cool dungeon if you just throw in some traps, throw in some theme-appropriate monsters. You know, you go into Isabella's room, and there's, like, crazy entangling things, and there's blights, and there's just all sorts of cool stuff.
Shambling mounds, all kinds of tree monsters. Just, you're good.
One worth pointing out is Bruno's room, which would also easily be it kind of is a dungeon for Mirabelle. You just need some sand elementals or rats, or were-rats to fight her.
It's got traps already.
We do have the scene where the sand is falling down, and she says, Casita, can you help me out? And the Casita sort of shrugs, metaphorically. And this idea that because Bruno is dead in our version, and that his room is kind of separated from the rest of the Casita. And that could be good as the secret clubhouse for the PCs. This is a place where Abuela can't overhear them, can't ask the Casita to mess with them, can't have the Casita overhear them and then indicate through Venetian blind charades to Abuela what they said, that this is like the private space, but it's also a dangerous space. They need to sort of go through the dungeon, make it their base, which PCs love very little more than going through a dungeon and making it their base.
Yes. At your discretion, Dolores might be able to overhear garbled bits and pieces of it. So if she's helping Abuela, if she's complicit, then she might be able to hear bits and pieces of what they're doing. I would strongly recommend against her hearing everything that they're doing, because otherwise it's for nothing. But if you want to have the PCs not completely get the drop on Abuela with whatever they plan, then that might be a way to get around it if Dolores is on the other side.
In terms of the rest of the town, like, I have literally gone, I've read the wiki, I've done the research.
I'm extremely impressed.
There's a church, and there's a town square, and there are stores. And there are houses, and there are farms, which we see in the Madrigal song, when my Tia Peppa, her mood controls the weather, we see a cornfield. So that is the farms that we see. The church is the distinctive feature. We do have that priest who you find out in the young adult novelization is called Father Flores. I don't think it would fit to have him have cleric levels, but it does say that most clergy don't have spell levels. They're just clergy. They're spiritual leaders. They perform rituals. They educate the faithful. He fits that very well. We're talking about this being a very polyglot society, a very cosmopolitan society. So the idea that this is not a temple to a specific god, but to kind of any good aligned god. There's a number of shrines to these different gods, and he leads the worship of any relevant god for any relevant occasion.
On the flip side, if you really want to play up the Abuela brainwashing aspect, then maybe whoever Abuela worships, she worships Ezra, she worships the Morning Lord, whoever, then suddenly everyone in Encanto worships that god, and maybe you even find evidence that Father Flores used to be a priest of a different god. But suddenly, after talking to Abuela, just Ezra really entered his heart, and he had a conversion experience, if you want to just play with that creepiness.
Part of the premise of Encanto is it is this magical land that provides for all their needs. Even though they're totally isolated, it has all the natural resources to do any kind of trade or profession, per the director on Twitter. One of the directors on Twitter. And that fits very much a domain, that the domain would have everything they needed. They could be this totally isolated and yet could not be just like subsistence farmers, living in sheepskins. We have this sort of typical small town village. And that means there's very little I can give you in terms of specific places, but also it has anything that a typical small town village in a D&D game would have. So there's a leather worker, there's a blacksmith, there's a farrier, there's like whatever basic adventuring supplies your PCs need.
There's probably not going to be an inn because they don't really get any travel, but of course all of the lovely welcoming people of Encanto would be happy to put your PCs up for the night.
Right, and there'd be like a tavern for people to drink and socialize and hear town rumors. But like if your rogue has been saving up to go from their leather armor to their studded leather armor, they could do that in Encanto in a totally plausible way. There's a blacksmith there. There's a leather worker there. So kind of any of the basic supplies. They can get better armor, sharpen their swords, get some new equipment, get some new supplies. Encanto can be this kind of like place they can get all the basic adventuring things in your average D&D village.
So we've talked about Encanto and how it's this tiny village that doesn't have a whole lot going on. So what kind of adventures can we have in?
What do you do with it?
Dread possibilities. Eventually, it came time for me to meet Abuela herself. She greeted me warmly, but I couldn't help noticing that for one who is so beloved by the villagers, she seemed to have little love from her own family. Her grandchildren danced on eggshells in her presence. She took my hand in hers, smiling, and said she would be delighted to have me join the village as a teacher. For a single moment, I could see the future spilling out in front of me, and it was beautiful. Remaining in this place that was free of all pain and sorrow, having a loving and supportive community, knowing that I had no responsibilities or worries whatsoever beyond being whomever would please this kindly woman. At that moment, I felt the ring you had given me go ice cold on my finger, and the vision vanished. I admit that I proceeded to say some rather indecorous things to Alma. I have no patience with witches, and certainly none with those who would try to supplant my mind. Alma never lost her veneer of politeness, but told me in icy tones that it would be best for the village if I left immediately, and I could not help but agree. Alma's granddaughter Mirabelle escorted me to the border. It may have been wishful thinking on my part, but I believe some part of her was delighted to see someone stand up to Alma. I am certain it was the first time she had seen anyone do so.
I want adventure in the great wide somewhere.
I want it more than I can tell.
Why did you come to Encanto other than you as a GM want to really, really break your players' hearts? And the mist just sort of shoved them out and handed them a tissue to wipe away their tears. Rachel.
Well, one possibility, since the biggest inn that you're going to have in Encanto is that it is this polyglot community of refugees. That you've got people coming in from all over the core. That could include people from the PC's own community, culture, or family. Or from a community, culture, or family that the PCs have been interacting with a lot. A beloved NPC has sent them in. They've heard that their sister and her children have vanished to this place. Can you please help find them? So any PC, especially if there's a PC who's from kind of a marginalized community that might be refugees, they might have people who have vanished and gone into Encanto. Or again, if they have a beloved NPC who's from a marginalized community, they might have somebody who's gone into Encanto, or they themselves might disappear into Encanto if their village has really done something to tick off straw, if they haven't been paying their taxes, and suddenly a bunch of people from the village vanish, and you heard that they went into the mists and it didn't come out. Then, you might be able to follow the trail of breadcrumbs and find them in Encanto. Another possibility, we talked about the Vistani. Maybe you've heard from Madame Ava or one of your other Vistani contacts that this group of Vistani went into Encanto, and she knows it's a ticking clock. Static burn takes a couple of weeks to set in. You have to go in and get them out of there before they fall victim to Abuela, before they can fall into that trap and stay there and become mortuary or dead to them forever.
And that ticking clock can also apply to anyone from any group, because we're talking about this charm effect Abuela has being more potent as time goes by. The longer you stay in Encanto, the more Abuela is the Abuela you never had. Mm-hmm. Even if the PCs don't know the specifics of all the mechanics here, I feel like they're going to be genre savvy enough that they go and they look around and everyone's happy and everyone loves Abuela and go, we got to get out of here now. And we got to get our buddies out of here now, or they're all going to love Abuela too. And this connects to some of the themes what we're doing with the Madrigals.
Oh, yeah.
With you are trying to escape Abuela's toxic dominion. You are trying to help your NPC who's maybe starting to go, wow, Abuela's so great. This place is perfect. This place is paradise. Realize, no, there's this darkness and this evil underneath the surface. This place is not paradise. So it could be just getting out your NPC, or be really easy to have that sort of same discovering the dark secret to tell your NPC also help you get some of the Madrigals out.
Yeah. And with rescuing a beloved NPC, with having it be a previously established character, or someone who, that you've heard a lot about in backstory, or that you've heard about, like this cousin of yours who's supposed to be so cool or whatever, it's going to be a real gut punch to go to Encanto and see how much they've changed, that they've really just completely fallen under Abuela's spell. On the one hand, maybe it's going to give a little bit more credence, make it seem a little bit more believable that Abuela's this great person because this person you're trusting is saying that she is. On the other hand, if you're going with the idea that sort of all the cultural differences are getting sanded away, then seeing the way that they've changed is really going to be disturbing for your PCs.
I think your PCs are going to be genre savvy enough that they see
that
your friend is like, actually, I love Abuela and I want to stay here forever in paradise. And they're like, we're playing Ravenloft. They're going to burn you alive in a wicker man. Like, this is bad. That's going to make them more tense and more like hostile and more desperate to get them out. Like, maybe there is something to this Encanto. Maybe we should do what Abuela says.
Yeah.
So that could get you in there, but then what do you do when you're in there? Some of the Ravenloft domains are a huge campaign setting. So Curse of Strahd, it's set in Barovia. It is a giant sandbox with tons of NPCs, tons of potential story hooks. We did the same thing with the Pride Lands. We said the Pride Lands is this very large setting with a lot of potential ways to engage with it and a lot of potential stories you could do. Other domains are one story. So there's Valachan, or Valacan, I don't know, I'm going to say Valachan. And Valachan is the most dangerous game. You go there and the Dark Lord gets you with a bunch of other adventurers and says, I'm going to give you a head start, I'm going to hunt you, and if you get to the shrine before like the sunset of the third day, then you get to go free. And that is the adventure. That is the way you engage with that domain.
And that's a fantastic adventure, but it's really only the one.
Right. It is no shame to be a single story domain. And that is what this is. There's one story, and the story is Encanto. And the story is getting possibly an NPC, definitely one or more of the Madrigals, to see the cracks, to stop turning away from the ugly truth, to see that Abuela's the one destroying the family, and to leave. So the big question is going to be which of the Madrigals. And this connects to our sort of dread possibilities section because this is where we're going into more off-book, off-canon things.
This is Future Rachel. As mentioned, this is the part where the episode kind of goes off a cliff. We get pretty dark here. We are talking about each of the Madrigals individually and how to rescue each of them, how to make each of them kind of fill the Mirabelle role in your campaign. But we also talk about, since this is D&D and you're going to want to have a boss fight, what's going to happen if each individual one of the Madrigals ends up deciding that they want to be on Abuela's side and fight you and stop you from getting the others out. That means that we are going to be talking about people having been brainwashed by Abuela. That might be bothersome to some people. That's certainly going to be bothersome to your kids if they're huge Encanto fans. So if you want to skip this part entirely or until you don't have kids in the room, we completely understand. It's about 17 and a half minutes long. So go ahead and skip forward to about 1 hour and 25 minutes or so. And then you'll be just in time for my next content advisory where I tell you how far I had to skip to get past the aging up section. See you soon. So the obvious one to try to turn against Abuela is Mirabelle. You know, she's the one who first gets turned against Abuela in the movie. She's the one who's the new black sheep. She's the one who kind of has the least buy-in, the one who's the most on the margins within the family. With all of the others, you're coming and saying, hey, other than the fact that you're miserable, your life is pretty great. Yeah. Your life seems like it should be awesome. So why don't you come help us? And you've been brainwashed by Abuela into believing that your misery doesn't matter and your life is awesome. But with Mirabelle, you can pretty clearly see why her life isn't awesome. There's a pretty obvious end there. Of course, the problem there is that if you're approaching Mirabelle, then you risk kind of just revisiting the movie over again. Your PCs might balk at that. You might balk at that.
As an enemy, Mirabelle doesn't have the obvious combat powers unless you are setting it in the casita, which, why wouldn't you? You should. Yeah. In which case, she has, much like Abuela, this kind of control, this sympathetic bond with the casita, and it could be a really intense and interesting and complicated boss fight. The house itself is trying to fight you and stop you from leaving and separate you from whichever of the other Madrigals you're trying to get out of there. Also, I told you this was dark, guys. What if Mirabelle decides that stopping your PCs from breaking up the family is the thing that's going to finally win Abuela's approval. It's finally going to prove her value and her worth to the family. depending on your PC's interaction with the Madrigals, we know that Mirabelle is this fierce defender of her family. She has this deep loyalty to her family. So if she saw you as an enemy, that could be a really heartbreaking fight as you try and get Isabella or Louisa to leave and Mirabelle's trying to stop you.
Oh, man.
Yeah, right?
Ugh. Mirabelle is an obvious one to get out. Less obvious one for a boss fight. But yeah, we do see her having the power over the casitas. That's cool. That works. I like that.
Yeah, right?
Isabella is the other one that we see kind of getting turned against Abuela in the movie itself. So she's another one who's fairly easy. That you can kind of go at her through all the pressure she's feeling. If the PCs can see that she's under all of this pressure to be perfect, that she doesn't want to be perfect, maybe they can see kind of the way that she's stiffening a little bit when they talk about Mariano Guzman. PCs love playing matchmaker.
Yeah,
so
right.
if you do want to play with either have her be gay and be into a girl who's there, or have it be she's in love with somebody other than Mariano Guzman who maybe Abuela doesn't approve of as much, then they could see her kind of making eyes at that person and really be going out of their way to try to hook her up with them. And oh my gosh, your PCs would eat that up with a spoon.
There are certain groups where if you get Isabella to come out and leave and go with them, they will be cheering and high-fiving and they will be remembering. They will be like cherishing that gaming memory forever.
Yes.
And Isabella's also good because kind of like with Mirabelle, there's this tension in the family that's on her. And then you have Antonio's gift ceremony and the cracks is like the inciting incident. Like that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And with Isabella, it can be the wedding. That the engagement and the wedding are like she's had this pressure to be Senorita Perfecta her whole life. And now like another thing that's finally too much for her.
And then as a boss fight, Isabella, obviously give her all the plant growth powers you can lay on her. Because she can be attacking you with Entangle, she can be attacking you with Thorn Whip, all kinds of good stuff. And because on the one hand, she hates having to be perfect all the time, on the other hand, there is a level of joy and pride in being the perfect child. If you've ever kind of been the favorite kid or the favorite in any situation, you know that combination of both having this pressure on you, but kind of loving it. And so she's going to really be protecting that role.
In the write-up for Encanto that I'm going to be putting on DM's Guild later, I am also going to go through and give some suggestions of specific like spells and powers that the Madrigals could be using.
And then the last of Julieta's daughters that we need to talk about is Luisa. And Luisa, once again, pretty obvious given what we have in the movie, she's got pressure, that like a drip, drip, drip. It just won't stop. Oh. And if you can convince her she's under too much pressure, she's taking on too much, then you might be able to get her to leave. That is going to be a tough sell, though.
For me, the big in with Luisa would be that she is the one that is physically perceiving that the magic is fading. That she can't deny that the magic is fading. And if Abuela is flat out lying and saying there's nothing wrong with the magic, that might be enough. She's this kind of very straightforward thinker, this very like direct person. So she could be the one who's just standing up and saying, no, Abuela, things are not okay.
Yeah. I don't think with Mirabelle and Isabella both, I could see you getting just that sister out. I don't think you could get Luisa out without at least one of her sisters with her.
Yes.
She is so fiercely loyal to her family. She has such a sense of responsibility. I think that if you were trying to get Luisa out, one of her conditions would be that somebody else had to come too. Maybe both of her sisters even.
She clearly sees herself as a protector of the family. So it would need to be, as you said, one or both of the sisters that she was leaving to continue protecting.
Yeah. Otherwise, she would want to stay in Encanto protecting them. You wouldn't be able to get her to get out. She would realize that Abuela was an enemy and that she was trying to hurt them. And maybe even for your party, that would be enough of a victory. That now Luis is going to be working against Abuela, trying to protect her family. But I don't know if that would be enough of a victory for a lot of parties. I'm not sure.
Louise as a boss fight is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Pretty sick too, right? Like
pretty
she's
terrifying.
gonna come at you like a Mack truck.
Ugh.
By the way, Isabella and Luisa, like as a boss fight
Holy
together,
monkey pants.
is gonna be a sick boss fight.
That would be the mage and the barbarian.
Exactly.
Oh, Christmas crackers.
Right,
wow.
yeah. That would be real. Everybody turned white knuckling their dice as each round rolled around. And once again, her as an opponent, really easy to imagine. A really tragic fight. This very well-meaning person who's been convinced you're an enemy just hitting you like a freight train.
Because you can do a version of Isabella that's evil aligned. You cannot do a version of Louisa that's anything but good aligned. She is just such a good person. And fighting this person who is so convinced that she's on the right side when it's visible from space that she isn't is really going to be heartbreaking if you go that way.
This episode's really dark. I don't think we sat down to, do Encanto and went, let's make the most depressing Disney adventure ever.
Let's make a story about...
Let's make a Tennessee Williams Ravenloft play kind of here. So that's Julietta's children, and then with Peppa's children, we've got also some good ends.
Yeah. They're not as developed as Julietta's children, with the possible exception of Dolores. But there are possibilities there. So let's start with Dolores, since she is the most well-developed. With Dolores, you have the end that she's the one, in the movie, she's the one who knows Bruno's still around. She can hear the rats in the walls. She hears him in the walls. You could have it be that her hearing is so good that she can hear ghosts. She can hear Bruno moving around in there. Her kind of penetrates the ethereal and she can hear him. Kind of giving her the supernatural level of hearing there.
Right. It could also be that she heard Abuela kill Bruno.
Yes, I didn't
She's
think about that.
heard Abuela talking to the candle.
Mm-hmm.
She's heard Abuela talking to the candle about who's going to die, and then they die. She's heard Abuela talking to the candle about the fact that the magic is fading. And she, more than any of them, could plausibly know something's rotten here.
She could plausibly know everything. More than any of them, she could be the one.
But she does have that sense of intense loyalty to her family, belief in her family, and also that kind of self-effacement,
Yes, she's a bit of a doormat. She's in love with Mariano, but she just stands by and lets Isabella marry him without saying a peep. And it's odd, this isn't our nitpicking Encanto plot holes podcast, but it's odd to have that she's, even in the movie, she's the one who's hearing Bruno and is able to keep the secret that she's hearing Bruno, yet she's not able to keep the secret of the vision that when she overhears Mirabel talking about it. So one possibility there, actually, to kind of square the circle, if we're having Alma have magical powers, is Alma would want to know about the vision, but she wouldn't want to know about Bruno. So maybe she has this pressure to be reporting to Alma anything she hears that would be in Alma's interest, that would be damaging to her if it were kept secret. But she's under this pressure to keep Alma's secrets. Maybe she even has that kind of suggestion or that charm that Abuela knows this is a risk and has really put this extra pressure on her to keep all that bottled up.
That would even explain her being kind of a doormat.
Yeah.
If she's been continually told to keep stuff to herself. Anyway, you have...
I need to take a shower. This is gross.
You have with Dolores the combination of A, she can know all the family secrets, and B, like we said with Isabella, with Mirabel, she's got an inciting incident. She's got that she's in love with Mariano. She can know that Isabella isn't in love with Mariano, and yet they're going ahead with this wedding. That could be the thing. Your PCs, they see her look at Mariano, they see her sigh, they see her look sad whenever the wedding comes up. That could be their in. And if they could flip Dolores, they blow the whole case wide open.
She's their CI.
That's the one thing. Forget any other skill checks to discover the dark secrets of Casa Madrigal. Just befriend this sad lady, and then sit there and sip your coffee while she tells you everything.
And once again, they are going to feel so good about themselves that they got her out of there. Tom knows, he has told me this, the secret to my heart as a GM, if he's GMing me, is I have an NPC who makes me feel sad, so I want to help them. And Dolores should be my girl.
Right, she's got those big big eyes, Dolores as a boss fight involves the most modification.
But it's cool.
It's cool. So the in-canon thing is to give her a bunch of the sort of divination things like some of the spells that give you advantage on initiative or give you advantage because you're predicting your opponent's actions. The idea is she's sort of doing a daredevil, she can hear the kind of rustle in your clothes and clench of your weapons and twitch of your fingers for the somatic components of the spell so she can predict what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. Going off canon, she also has sonic blast powers. If you have a D&D character with super hearing, then they should be able to cast Shatter by shrieking really loudly. That's just basic D&D science.
If you want to have her as a combo, too, because she's not going to be, with all that divination stuff, she's not going to be doing all that much on her own, because she's not a combat monster like certain Luises we can name.
Yeah, right.
But you could have her kind of doing buffs to some of the other characters. By shouting to them what you're about to do, then she's able to give Luisa a bonus for attack rolls or whatever.
Antonio is also easy to do because you've got a lot of reasons for him to split away from the family. You have got the fact that he can talk to the animals, he can talk to the rats. The rats told me everything. He can know everything that's happening with the animals telling him. This, once again, very much fits the kind of character archetype of the kid who everyone sort of ignores and dismisses, but who knows a lot more about what's going on in the family than people think they do. He's really close to Mirabelle. He sees how hurt she is. Even if Mirabelle's saying, no, I can still make Abuela love me, maybe he's got that kind of childlike moral purity. He doesn't accept the sort of compromises and the choosing not to notice things and the choosing not to notice what's going on that a lot of adults do.
You even have, because folk horror is also kind of goes hand in hand with dystopia, so it even kind of works as being... There's a reason why so much dystopia is young adult and middle grade. That when you're young, you haven't accepted all the ways that society is broken. And so with Antonio being so young, it could be that he, as an adult, you look at all the things that are messed up in the world and you say, oh, that's just the way things are. Like, all of us who are adults listening to this, we remember being horrified at the absolute unfairness of the world when we were, teenagers and tweens and whatnot. And now that we're adults, our teen and tween selves would be absolutely appalled by some of the things that we just kind of shrug and say, well, that's life, what you gonna do nowadays. There are plenty of things where we don't say that, but you have to pick your battles, and our teen and tween selves did not do that. Anyway, that's a whole nother kettle of fish.
I'm willing to bet you have at least one.
You have at least one.
You have at least one. If you're old enough to use Spotify, you have at least one.
So Antonio, he kind of has that if he has not accepted that the world is broken, he hasn't accepted this is the way things are, and he doesn't have that level of complacency to him. That puts him in sort of the position of being able to be like a Jonas from The Giver, a Katniss, a Triss, whatever. And
your PCs aren't going to be like cheering and high-fiving, but they're going to have like a warm glow of moral satisfaction if they help this boy follow his conscience, see the corruption that he's starting to perceive in his family, and hold on to that kind of childlike moral purity and leave. They are going to feel good about themselves.
Oh yeah, every party wants to save a kid. That's just life.
And if you can save a kid by having them refuse to accept those kind of moral compromises that come with having a mortgage, then...
Because those of us who have a mortgage would kind of look back at our teen and tween selves and say, yeah, where did that go?
Wow, this is really... I told you this was dark.
I did not walk away from Omaha, so I'm still hanging out in Omaha.
Yeah, right.
Using my phone built in a sweatshop, that's me.
To get 2-day free shipping.
Yep, from a sweatshop.
From Omaha's Prime. You get the streaming for free! As a boss fight, Antonio, he is still a child. He has believed in these authority figures. He's believed in his parents. He's believed in Abuela. If they tell him you're bad, if they tell him you're destroying the family, he's very likely going to believe it. And then he's going to summon a whole bunch of jaguars, and it's going to be a really great, really sad fight, which is kind of the theme of this episode. Don't fight Antonio! He's just a little boy! Even though his toucan is trying to peck your eyes out. Camillo is the one we have to go kind of the farthest off book for because we get the least of him. We do have that he is a joker. He's the funny one in the family. He's trying to use humor to deflect tension and to relieve tension. But also, I noticed he's, as kind of the funny one, the joker, he can be more blunt than a lot of the others. There's a lot of scenes where he's sort of saying what everyone's thinking because he's doing it as a joke. So like we're going to talk about how we don't have a house?
So we gonna talk about Bruno.
Building on that, if you can have that he is more blunt, he is more plain-spoken, he is less willing to accept these sort of compromises and everyone just sort of agreeing not to talk about Bruno, then that could be something, once again, your PCs could be very attracted, very drawn to the blunt-speaking one, the one that just speaks plainly.
Dean Winchester.
Exactly. And then they could sort of flip him from there, get him to kind of follow that
dedication to truth.
Yes. And then Shapeshifter, really useful to have in a group.
Yes. And combat application should be pretty obvious. He's just wild shaping the wild shape all up and down the wild shape.
We don't ever see him turn into a dire bear, but it doesn't mean he can't.
Come on. And if he doesn't turn into a dire bear, he can turn into Louisa. So, yeah.
2 Louises. Double the trouble.
Oh, boy. 2 Louises and an Isabella. You're part
yeah, right. You forget it, right? Like TPK
Go
time.
Go home.
We're just going to truss you up and ship you to the border.
Sorry, Mirabelle. Bye.
Bye. We did our best.
So that gives you kind of an idea of how to handle the Madrigals, how to bail out any or all of them in order to be able to have your session, have your adventure, have it be something other than just straight up playing Encanto. If somebody other than Mirabelle is in, like, especially if it's one of Peppa's kids, since they are much less developed than Julietta's kids in the movie, then it'll give your campaign kind of a unique feel.
Speaking of dread possibilities,
this is a part where we're going to talk about aging down and aging up. We've mentioned this is a podcast that we know that some of our listeners have children, are interested in running Disney-themed games for children. So how do you age it down, not engage with some of these horrendously dark things?
Yeah, like, how do you not do this horror show that we have been giving you?
Gosh.
How do you make this fun?
And then the other is kind of aging up, which really is what we've been talking about all the time. So for aging down...
Can we steer this burning airplane of miserableism to a safe landing and make this story fun again, honey?
Yes, we can.
Phew! What a relief.
Thank the magic candle.
Real intense.
The main way to make this movie less horrible than it is now, most kids are not going to want Abuela to be evil. When we were telling our own kids about some of our ideas for these episodes and these domains, our kids don't even particularly like Abuela, but they were horrified at the idea that she would be the Dark Lord.
The Madrigals love her so much that the idea that she is a villain and that love is wrong was upsetting them.
Yes. So if you're willing to go off canon and say that there are such things as redeemable Dark Lords, then that could be a way to go here. If you're like me and that's kind of an ice pick in your brain, then you can have this just be a haunted house. Congratulations. There's an evil haunted house that's manipulating Abuela. She is not herself a Dark Lord.
There's a village. It's not a domain.
Yes. So in this particular case, you would still have the candle be evil and the casita be evil. But they're being controlled by this ghost or other outside force that's manipulating Abuela and tricking her and kind of forcing her to be cruel to her family and to be cruel to Mirabelle in particular, since she's the cruelest too in the movie.
In this younger version, you can cut the whole ritualized human sacrifice.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah,
right?
No ritualized human sacrifice in the younger version.
In case it needed to be said.
Yeah. You definitely do not want to have the human sacrifice if you want to be playing up the visions that Bruno was having in the actual movie and say that the power of the casita is maintained by goldfish dying or by Father Flores going bald or by whoever it was getting a gut. Oswaldo, thank you. Thomas.
Yeah, right? Like, I'm an Encanto expert.
That you can either say, I don't think you would want to have Abuela doing that on purpose. I think that would be a little bit too dark. But you could have it be that the casita is kind of fueling itself through these misfortunes.
And speaking of Bruno, in this version, I think you can still keep the death, but it's 100% accidental.
Yes. Kids are okay with ghosts, I found, in general. Yeah. But it has to be 100% accidental. Maybe even Abuela's not responsible for it at all. Like, maybe she doesn't even know he's dead. Maybe she thinks he disappeared too. I would probably have it be that the casita killed him, actually.
Yeah.
I would probably have it be that, he was, like, leaving his tower, which is his safe space, and tiles lifted up and, flung him back into a wall and cracked his head or something.
And hit his body.
Yeah. If you're running it for kids, you don't even want to get into any level of detail with that, I don't think. You just want to have it be in some way the casita killed him because he knew too much.
Yeah, Abuela thinks he ran away, but he's actually a ghost, and he can tell you all the secrets. And he can tell you, blow out the candle.
Also, in the younger version, I'd say that she probably doesn't have the charm ability, and that you would want to get rid of the idea of people sort of giving up their individual cultures. That's a little bit too creepy. Again, you know your kids, maybe your kids would eat that up with a spoon.
Or that might even be too abstract for them.
Yeah.
As a piece of horror.
Yeah. The mass suggestion, I think, still works, and it's still something that we see in the movie. But that the charm and the idea of her kind of being Jasmine from season 4 of Angel, kind of bringing everyone under her wing.
Stamp reference to the Buffy verse on your polar generational bingo card. And your Rachel bingo card.
So you could have it be for your ghost, your evil force that's manipulating Alma. If your kids are aware of kind of the Ravenloft cosmology, then you could have it be the dark powers are sort of trying to lure her into being a Dark Lord, that this is the dark powers at work. You could have it be the ghost of Pedro, that he did make this sacrifice. She didn't push him. Again, that's probably something you're going to want to do anyway. That he did sacrifice himself, but as a ghost, part of him has become angry and bitter, and you need to put him to rest. That he's kind of trying to manipulate Alma, that he's trying to say, oh, well, you know, you need to be properly grateful for my miracle. This is the miracle that I've given you. And that your goal is to make him see that he's hurting her, see that he's hurting the family, and move on and go to rest. If you don't want to go there, if you want to have a ghost, but you don't want it to be Pedro, if even that is too dark for your table, then you could have it be that she just kind of picked up some random villager who's angry, who's also getting chased by the press gang, and who is angry at her for surviving when they didn't. You could have it be that one of the soldiers is saying that, well, no, you don't get to escape. You thought you were going to escape us, but you're never going to escape. I've got you trapped forever, and I'll haunt all of your waking days.
Right, it could be that Pedro was fighting the soldiers to save the others, to buy them time, killed one of them, and that soldier is the one that sort of trapped them in this repeating bubble of misery.
And it's saying something that this is our bright and happy
right.
alternative, but it is. So in that particular case, the game that you would be playing, you're trying to save all of the Madrigals, including Abuela. Probably all the Madrigals through Abuela, kind of again, as we see in the movie, that once Abuela realizes that she's wrong, that things are being done wrong, that she comes around and is able to save her entire family. And in that case, your boss fight is going to be with the Casita. The Casita is being powered by whatever evil ghost you put into it. And you get to have that cool animated house boss fight, but without horrible emotional abuse.
Right, and the Madrigal's powers are fading, so they can only help you a little bit. And you even get this amazing, don't just get something to 0 hit points if you can blow out the candle.
Yes.
The candle's up there in Abuela's room, on the top floor. If you can get to the candle, if you can blow it out, you can save everything, but you have to fight a house first. And it's going to be super cool, and your kids are going to all high five when they blow out the candle and save the family.
And by the way, this is something that we've discovered in adapting Adventures for Kids. It's not just for kids. If you were listening to this and going, I want to run Encanto for my party, but this is way too dark.
Like, absolutely not this.
Feel free to do this haunted house version.
And your adults will all high five each other when they blow up the magic candle and save the family.
Yes. So for aging up, once again, we are going to have future Tom or future Rachel come in and tell you how to skip ahead now. This is future Rachel. You're going to want to skip ahead about 5.5 minutes to about 1 hour, 38 and a half minutes. This honestly doesn't get a whole lot worse than the fighting the Madrigals section. If you are fine with that, you'll be fine with this. If not, we completely understand, and we will see you in about 5.5 minutes.
So, Rachel, we landed the plane. And we blew out the magic candle and made this not a just nightmare of emotional abuse. Can we get that plane back in the air and fill it with feral cats?
And have William Shatner sitting there screaming.
There's feral cats on the plane.
Yes.
Eating the wings. Can we make this worse?
We can.
I believe in us.
And part of how we can make it worse, there have been the points, because this is a family-friendly PG-rated podcast, where our adult listeners might have noticed that we start to approach something and then immediately back away. As long as you session zero it with your players, maybe you don't.
Cannot stress that enough.
Cannot stress enough the session zero.
With this one.
100%, absolutely. And
always a good idea,
yes,
especially now.
Especially with any kind of thing involving emotional abuse, familial trauma. You have no idea what kind of baggage your players are bringing to the table. You gotta make sure you session zero this. But there have been some of these areas where we're approaching something and then backing off. If your party is up for facing that head on, that's a way that you can age it up. One thing, being more explicit with that abuse. Since Abuela is more villainous, you can have her be much more cruel on screen than we see her being in the movie. Just imagine if she's got the level of cruelty of Lady Tremaine, but they all desperately love her and want to please her. That is horrifying.
It really is.
Yeah.
A big lever here that you can crank all the way up to traumatic nightmare is how conscious Abuela is doing these bad things. Mm-hmm. And in the movie, I think they did a really amazing job of she is putting all this pressure on her family. She is making everyone miserable. And on some level, she knows she is, and that's why she's a great Dark Lord. But she's denying it to herself. Mm-hmm. On almost all of her conscious moments, she's telling herself everything is fine, everything is great, Mariana is going to be perfect for Isabella. They're not, Luisa is strong and she's doing her proper role in the community. Mirabelle is a screw up, so she just needs to stay out of the way, and I'm being very nice and very patient with her.
I don't think she ever once says anything like, Mirabelle, why can't you be more like Isabella?
Yeah. But if you make that more conscious, if you make it that she's more consciously manipulating the members of the family, deliberately setting them against each other, deliberately kind of holding up Isabella against the others to make them feel insecure, deliberately being hypercritical of Isabella to make her feel insecure, just being the worst person in the world, then you can make this darker and more dull. Mm-hmm. Another possibility is that she's presenting a more benevolent face, but she has a member of the family that's maybe like the bad cop. Mm-hmm. Like if Abuela is not the one who is doing all this, maybe this idea that she's communicating that Julieta and Pepa, the mothers, are the one putting all the pressure on their children because they're getting this from their Abuela. It just seems to be coming from them.
Mm-hmm. And then if you're having her sort of setting up this idea that one of the mothers is filling this bad cop role, then you're also establishing the idea, is the idea of cycles of generational trauma, cycles of abuse, that the daughter is going to become her mother. You're going to be watching the horror and the tragedy unfolding of this poor daughter becoming her horrible mother. My gosh, this episode.
I told you we could get darker. Told you to get that plane back in the air, guys. And this could get super dark, as we've pointed out. You could have this the PCs perceive that Abuela is the root cause of all this, but they're never actually having to engage with Abuela because the children and the grandchildren have so internalized this. They are the ones fighting the PCs. They are the ones opposing them. They're the ones trying to stop them. Isabella and Luisa are the ones trying to stop them from leaving with Mirabelle. Abuela doesn't even need to be on scene. Mm-hmm. Because they have so internalized this toxic dynamic that the cycle of abuse is continuing and everything is horrible. And I'm sure you're very glad you're listening to this episode.
There's a thing with the fight or flight response that they've stretched it out that it's not just fight or flight. First they had fight, flight, or freeze, and then they expanded it to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And the idea that you take on this kind of fawning dynamic that you're trying to appease the person who is harming you. And you could really play up that they've kind of adapted this adoration of Abuela, not even just because of her charm and suggestion abilities, but as a defense mechanism.
I promise our next episode will be less dark than this, maybe. Probably. I promise it will probably maybe be less dark than
the episode after the next episode.
Yes, no, they're not gonna all be this. Just maybe this one and the next one and then maybe a couple more.
Oh my gosh. People were like, we should do Encanto. It's the new one.
It's gonna buzz. It's gonna trend.
This I promise this is not representative of what this whole show is. Please listen to next episode.
There's gonna be some, remember how great Lion King was? It was just roving cannibal mole gangs. And forced marriage. Good times, guys. Good times. Please listen to the next episode. So leaving the miserable adult world behind, why don't we go now into our final section in which we will share our parting thoughts in a section we like to call
Parting Thoughts.
So we like to open this section by talking about the genre of horror, and normally this is a little bit of a game because we don't share the genres of horror, but I feel like we've tipped our hand a little bit with this one, in that we had a section where we said, hey, we really wanted to make this folk horror. So folk horror.
Folk horror and psychological horror.
Psychological horror, right? I mean, it's folk horror, and we're talking about the horrible gaslighting and manipulation. It's that. And how you love her and want her to be your Abuela, and she brainwashes you. Like, it's those two things.
Yeah.
Folk horror, psychological horror.
There's really not more to talk about.
And I'm like, ooh, Gothic, how interesting. So what kind of game do you run in this? And this touches on something I mentioned before. This is one specific adventure. You have your PCs come to Encanto if you want to do Encanto. But Rachel, how do you incorporate this into the wider world of Ravenloft if you are doing a kind of game that has less individual floating islands of mist with individual spooky adventures and more of a unified Ravenloft domains?
Well, the most obvious way to incorporate it is to be playing up the domains that have refugees, that are going to be having conflicts, that are going to be having people fleeing from them, trying to find this safe haven. Falcavnia, obviously, is a big one. We mentioned Invidia and the Vistani who are fleeing from Invidia and becoming more too, and maybe get some Vistani who flee from Invidia, see Encanto, and go, nope, and turn right around and go out of there.
Never mind.
As we are all wanting to do right now.
Yeah, right. Where are the Cannibal Knoll gangs?
You could have, there's the conflict between Barovia and Gundarak.
That could be a really good way, the conflict between Barovia and Gundarak, a good way to transition if you're doing Curse of Strahd.
Yes.
That this is a Barovia-adjacent, militarily occupied population.
Mm-hmm. Or, as we kind of alluded to earlier, if you don't even want to bring in the Gundarak stuff, you could have it be that there was a town that wasn't paying their taxes properly, and a bunch of people got the heck out of Dodge. Hazland, no matter what version of Hazland you're doing, there are going to be people who are running away from their horrible wizard overlords. So, the most obvious way to be bringing in various Ravenloft meta plot, possibly having people in Borca fleeing,
possibly
people who are Delisnia sympathizers and made Ivana mad, or Brizzi sympathizers and made Ivan mad, trying to get away.
A G on my bingo card. So Rachel references Borca. I'm going to mark put my little my token down on Encanto.
So that's the obvious way. But another interesting thing that you could do with it that was evolving as we were planning and talking about it is that it works really well as a dark mirror to Carnival, because we were talking about, well, you go and everyone seems happy and it's this wonderful place and it's Ravenloft, so clearly that's a trap. Well, in Carnival, it's not a trap, right? I mean, Carnival really is this place where if you're fleeing from whatever problems you're having and you go there, then it really is a place where all the weirdos and the misfits come together and have a haven. Especially if you're going with the older stuff where it's not a domain, you don't have the evil sword being a Dark Lord. It's just a place for all of the people who are fleeing from something to come together, get their baggage all out in the open, and have a community. And it works really well as a mirror, and Abuela works really well as a mirror to Isolde, because in Carnival, again, I'm mostly going off the older stuff here because I absolutely love...
Hashtag not my Isolde.
I'm not gonna make it a thing, but I really love old Carnival, and I get in 5e they were kind of given an impossible task for adapting Carnival, but I don't think they could have done anything that would have made me happy, but they sure didn't. Anyway.
But they succeeded.
So in the older material of Carnival, you had this idea that everyone was coming together and joining the Carnival, and they all adored Isolde. Everyone loved her and thought that she was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But number one, she wasn't forcing them to. There are people in the Carnival who don't like Isolde. You've got Professor Picali. You've got other kind of people who are the voices of dissension. And you've also got in Carnival, in the older material, you had the idea that people were actually changing and their bodies were changing in ways that were sort of displaying their personalities, and in some ways they were becoming more themselves, whereas Abuela is making them less themselves. It's a really cool kind of C.S. Lewis sort of theological thing going on there. I'm not going to geek out over too much, but I am in my head, believe me.
If you want a fun time, do Encanto, then Carnival. Watch your players jump at every shadow.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Abuela is exactly what Macaulay thinks Isolde is in the older material. It works beautifully as a dark mirror of Carnival.
So going into the strengths and weaknesses of Encanto. Strengths, I would say it's a good story. It's a very well fleshed out family drama. That's going to be emotionally engaging for your players. They're going to feel that sense of connection, familiarity with the Madrigal family. They're going to care about the Madrigal family. But there is that strong variability that you could have. This is the Taroka reading, the beginning of Curse of Strahd, Castle Ravenloft. You can shuffle the deck, pull out a couple cards, see who your enemy is, see who your ally is. There's a number of possible ways this story can play out, determined by how your PCs interact with the various Madrigals.
And then for challenges, just as has been coming out over and over again in this episode, this is going to be a really dark story, even if you try to lighten it up. Just the movie was able to perfectly thread that needle of being a bit dark but very cathartic, and you don't have the level of control over your session that a scriptwriter has over the movie. Even if you're doing kind of the lighter, fluffier version that we discussed in the kids section, there's the potential for this to get very dark. You are going to want to session zero the heck out of this with your players. There are some parties that you will not be able to run any version of this game with because it's touching on some kegs of dynamite here. Another issue with it is it's such a specific and limited setting. There is really only the one story you can do with it. If you want to kind of branch off and do other stories, there aren't a whole lot of options for that. And also you have to do pretty much everything other than the Madrigals and the Casita completely from scratch. If your PCs really decide, forget the Madrigals, they've all been completely brainwashed, we can't save them, we really want to help Mariano Guzman. What are we going to do for Mariano Guzman? Well, all you have for him is that he's a hopeless romantic who loves to sing. And
writes poetry.
And he makes his mother proud. That's all you got. So anything else that you want to do that doesn't involve the Madrigals or the Casita, you have to do that completely on your own.
The stereotypical, they show up at the town and they're like, we want to go to the inn. And you're like, well, yeah, I guess there's an inn. So who's in the inn? Well, there's a guy at the inn. Like, you have to do all that for Encanto. You have to fill in every NPC, every setting thing that's basically not a Madrigal or Mariano. They go to the inn and they say, who's at the inn? And you're like, there's a lady with a dead goldfish. She looks sad. You do have to do that same level of world building, which normally the benefit of kind of a pre-made setting is you don't have to do that level of world building. But you do here because this is an incredibly Madrigal-centric adventure.
But there is a lot going for the setting. You can make it work. Just, I cannot stress enough how much you need to be careful with this setting. How many kid gloves you have to wear.
With the end of The Lion King, I was like, run an adventure in the setting. It's great. I would run Encanto for my group. Some of them.
I would run Encanto for one of my groups. I would not run Encanto for both of my groups.
So that's the thing. This is a much pricklier, this is a much more emotionally challenging story to be doing. So have that much more care. And you might be one of those people in a situation where you're like, this sounds super cool. I absolutely can't do this.
You do not want to be the GM who gave one of your players a traumatic flashback. It just don't.
So before we rejoin our narrator and find out where she's going next, which is a place that will almost certainly be less dark than Encanto.
I think it's gonna be darker than The Lion King, but I don't think it's gonna be as bad as this, because boy howdy.
Yeah, right. As I mentioned previously, talking about the Madrigals, I am gonna write all of this up as a Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft style domain and post it on DM's Guild. We'll put the link in the show notes, and that will be free. So if you want to go and take this and make your players very sad, but possibly very happy, but very sad, then you'll be able to do that. And speaking of DM's Guild, because it's the part where we plug our stuff, I have other movies I've adapted for adventures in D&D. I have done John Carpenter's Halloween. I've done John Carpenter's The Fog. If you're more on the adult horror running, you're like, ooh, wow, I can make Abuela really horrible. My group will love that. You can take those adventures. You can run them as cool horror movies. I also, if you are running the Strixhaven setting, just put up a supplemental resource that is going to be, I promise you, very, very useful in your Strixhaven game.
I had not read the official, actual D&D Strixhaven book that came out, and Tom had me proofread this for him, and I was reading it and saying, what is even in the official Strixhaven book? Because everything you need is in here. I'm not just saying that because I'm his wife. That is a direct quote from me proofing this. And then for me, you can go to my website, www.rachelkohler.com, if you want some of my stuff for kids, some of my stuff for adults that features all kinds of awful horror, just like this. If you are mainly just interested in following us and finding out more about the podcast, you can find our podcast at redcircle.com with Wonderful World of Dark Lords. You can email us at wonderfulworldofdarklords@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at Wonderful World of Dark Lords. On Twitter, Wonderful World of Dark Lords is too long. Wonderful Dark Lords is also too long, so you can find us on Twitter at Wonder Dark Lords.
Yes! Little note of levity to end the episode for you there, folks. Wonder Dark Lords. Until next month, be nice to your players and happy gaming.
Parting thoughts. I know my patron will be disappointed that I was sent away from Encanto before I could discover what lay at its heart. I hope he will believe me when I say that no one is more disappointed than I am. I would like nothing more than to see this witch deposed. If Bruno truly was responsible for the accident that befell the villagers, I believe that Alma's hand was behind it all. Nothing happens here without her blessing, and no one takes any action with an aim other than pleasing her. I only wish I knew her goals. Whatever they may be, Encanto is a trap, luring its villagers into Alma's web with sweet promises of peace. I hope that I will have more success with the next domain I survey. I have a thimble as a mist token, but I am told that I do not need it, for unlike most domains, there are simple directions for finding one's way to this one. Second star to the right, and straight on till morning.
Do not overestimate your usefulness to me, my little servant. I have given you what you need to survive. We will see how you progress. A practitioner of the arcane must have patience and absolute control over their emotions. This report, which reads as if written by a petulant child, indicates you are far from ready. Perhaps my servant believes that folk tales or gossip of the peasantry beneath her notice, but there is always a grain of truth in their tales that can be most enlightening. This candle may have saved Madrigal from the Falcovnians, but the tale she told you, combined with the obvious enchantment she holds over the villagers, must hide the sinister nature of the formation of Encanto. If you did a minor amount of research on Falcovnia's history of conquest, you would find that a safe haven from their army is hardly necessary. As for Bruno and the usefulness of these gifts bestowed on Madrigal's family, more information would have been desirable. My little scholar will need to quell her anger so she's not expelled from the next domain she visits before completing her survey.
This has been The Wonderful World of Dark Lords. We have no affiliation with Disney or Wizards of the Coast. All music recordings used in this episode are in the public domain and were obtained through museopen.org. Titles and links are in the show notes. Dialogue for Yensid was written by Aslan Rex himself, who you can follow on Twitter at DarkLordAslan. The Wonderful World of Dark Lords logo was designed by Haylight Jones. You can find links to their work in the show notes. Thanks for listening.
Also, this being Dungeons & Dragons, where all of our problems are solved by punching and fireballs, which of them are the boss fight? And they're all, the wonderful thing is, all the grandchildren, who are the ones we get the most about, have a kind of in to either turn them against Abuela and the family, rightly so, or to be an awesome boss fight. Lisa.
Isabella, we need to do the boss fight.
Oh, yeah. Do it. And then going to Peppa's children, we've got...
Oh, we need to have Luis as a boss fight.
With Antonio, we also have an easy one.
Boss fight.
Oh, yeah. The hardest is Camille. Me. I don't want to fight the Madrigals, honey.